It's time to cook with Susan Beck. Well, it's a snow day here in Wisconsin, and there's nothing better to do on a snow day than to bake bread. One of my favorite things to do when I'm going to be home all day and the house is nice and warm with the fire going and it's chilly and cold outside. In fact, it's not even really a snow day today. It's more of a very, very cold out, negative 16 degrees, and that's not counting the wind chill. So having the oven going will be just a nice way to warm up the house a little bit too. Today we're going to make whole wheat cinnamon raisin bread. This is a recipe I made a couple weeks ago, and I had just totally forgotten I had it in my recipe file. I don't know why I hadn't come across it, but I probably hadn't made it for a couple of years. And oh, did we enjoy it so much. We enjoyed it as much as the first time when a coworker gave me a loaf of it at school. And it is just the sweetest, almost like a cinnamon roll, in that you're gonna have this brown sugar raisin filling inside, but it's got some whole wheat flour giving you a little extra fiber there. We'll be making 2 loaves of bread. If you only wanted one, you could cut this recipe in half, but it's so popular at my house that we always make the 2 loaves of bread. You could freeze one too if you didn't feel like you could get through them all while they were still fresh. So let's have a look at the recipe's ingredients. Today's ingredients are divided into 3 groups. We will be starting with our dry ingredients. This large container back here is my instant yeast. We definitely will not be using all of that. We'll just be using 2 teaspoons, but that's the container I store it in the refrigerator. I have 2 cups of whole wheat flour and 2 cups of bread flour. I have also made this recipe with all-purpose flour, so that would be fine if you do not have bread flour or don't want to invest in a whole package of that. We'll use 2 teaspoons of salt. For our wet ingredients, we have a 1/4 cup of honey, 1 large egg. We'll use 2 tablespoons of canola oil, a 1/4 cup of milk, and 1 cup of water. And lastly, the filling for our whole wheat cinnamon raisin bread. We're gonna have some brown sugar, raisins, and some cinnamon. We're gonna begin by putting our dry ingredients into our mixing bowl. So we have the 2 cups of whole wheat flour, and I like this recipe because it's a combination. Sometimes all wheat flour, you get kind of a very dense, heavy bread, and my family kind of prefers this mixture. The bread flour, a little different than all-purpose flour in that it has more proteins and works better for breads, where your all-purpose flour is great for your cookies and so forth. You can exchange it on an equal basis, so that was 2 cups of bread flour for 2 cups of all-purpose flour. The difference with the proteins in those 2 types of flours will make just a bit of difference with your texture. But I have made it both ways and really have liked it either way I have done it. So either one would be fine. Okay, next is 2 teaspoons of instant yeast. I have switched to instant yeast, as I have mentioned in all of my cooking videos, because I had switched to instant yeast before ever making YouTube videos. Instant yeast to me is just the greatest invention. I used to have so much trouble activating my yeast with the warm waters and the sugars, and how long did it sit, and did it get bubbly, and was it ready to make my bread dough rise. And ever since I've switched over to the instant yeast, I've never had a failed baked good. Everything has risen. So I really recommend you switch. Now, one of the big differences, which I think makes it easier, is that it goes in with our dry ingredients. I'm adding my 2 teaspoons of salt here as well while I stir these together. That instant yeast then just gets activated by our warm water and milk that we're going to heat up here. But it's just so simple to use. The only thing to remember is that you want to kind of get it mixed completely through all of your dry ingredients, then add your wet ingredients. It comes in, well, it probably comes in smaller containers, but I always buy it in a big rectangular prism, and this will last me over a year. And if I store this in the refrigerator, it really does last. Well, as you can see, this is a new container of it, but my last loaves of bread were just as good as my first loaves. As I move on to the wet ingredients, I am going to just add that 1/4 cup of milk to this 1 cup of water, and then I am going to heat this so it is somewhere between 120, 135 degrees. I don't want it too hot. I don't want to kill my yeast. I want to just activate my yeast. But it does need to be warm enough to do that. In my microwave, I have found 1 minute and 30 seconds is perfect. If you aren't so sure about that, using a thermometer is really a great idea. So give me a moment while I heat this up. Our milk and water is warm, so now we'll move on to our wet ingredients. First, I have a 1/4 cup of honey that I have put into this adjustable measuring cup. It makes it so easy just to wipe that honey right off into the flour mixture. We're going to put in 2 tablespoons of canola oil. Vegetable oil, any kind of oil you have would be just fine. And we're going to use 1 large egg. I'm going to crack that over here to be sure I don't get any shells, and in that goes. Last wet ingredient is that milk and water combination for a total of 1 1/4 cups of liquid there. All right, my honey's sticking to my spatula a little bit. Let's get that down in. And then we're going to use our stand mixer today and our dough hook. Slide this mixer over a little bit and put on our dough hook. So we're going to start this and run it on a low speed for like 3 minutes just to get everything mixed together. Possibly use a spatula to kind of bring it down from the sides if it's sticking up above. And as you can see, that egg is not quite, oh, there it goes, getting mixed in a little bit. You gotta get that yolk broken yet. I'm gonna turn it up just a little bit to get hold of that. Those good, tough farm yolks. Well, I'm just going to use a spatula here to get some of that flour that's still kind of up on the sides mixed in, and maybe run it underneath the bottom a little bit, because we want all of our whole wheat and bread flour mixed in, as well as that yeast and salt and so forth. And then we're going to turn up the speed. Now this part, we're going to let it run for like 5 minutes, kneading this dough and really working those yeasts and getting everything activated and ready to rise. If you don't have a stand mixer and a dough hook, you can easily knead this on the counter. All right, my dough hook is working like crazy on this dough for our whole wheat cinnamon raisin bread. Well, 5 minutes has gone by, and as you can see, we have everything in kind of a nice sticky dough ball. If your dough is not coming together like that, you just simply add, a tablespoon or 2 of flour at a time until you can get it to pull away from the sides. But this is looking great today. Place your dough in a greased bowl and cover tightly with plastic wrap. We want our bread dough to double in size, so it's nice to take note of how full the bowl is right now so that it's easier to tell. While the bread is rising, I'm just going to do a little prep work with my raisins. Now I said 2/3 cup of raisins. I have a heaping 2/3 cups of raisins. And I am going to turn this burner on high. I want to get my water to a boil along with my raisins inside. And this just kind of plumps up the raisins. I do the same thing when I make a raisin sauce that my family loves on ham. And I don't know, it just kind of adds a little moisture to them. If you have really good fresh raisins, you could skip this step in the process. If your raisins are getting kind of dried out, you've had them for a while, then this is a must, and you can kind of rejuvenate them and make them back into a great looking raisin. So once this comes to a boil, I'm just going to put a lid on it, and I'm just going to let it sit, and then we'll drain them when we're ready to roll out our bread dough and put this into our filling of brown sugar, cinnamon, and raisins. It sure is a good bread rising day. Some days are better than others. This is after just an hour, and we have almost filled this container. So I think we're ready to go ahead and make it into loaves. And now it's time for the most satisfying part of making bread. You get to take this beautifully risen bunch of dough and punch it down. Whew, I don't know why, but even my kids agree that that is just a fun task. The other part is actually just kneading that dough if you don't want to, even if you have a stand mixer with a dough hook, there's just something satisfying about kneading that bread too. Making bread in general is just very satisfying. So as I mentioned, this is going to make 2 loaves of bread. So I'm going to be breaking this into 2 chunks. But first, let's put some flour down on our countertop. We want to prevent sticking. We won't have too much trouble with that, but it just makes it a little bit easier. So I am going to divide this into half, and I just eyeball that. I don't weigh it out or anything like that. And now I'm just going to work on making this into a nice rectangle. And you know, it has a tendency to kind of work its way back in. You let go and it kind of cinches back together. That's okay, just work it a little longer and we'll be good. You kind of want it about the size of this pan, kind of that width, and somewhat square in shape, but again, you know, I'm not going to measure or get real worried about exactly how it looks. Now it's time to add the fillings to our square of dough here. We're going to brush it with just a little bit of canola oil. And again, this step could really be skipped too, but I guess it kind of makes the brown sugar and cinnamon stick a little bit. So I'm just going to give it a light brushing. I'm using a pastry brush here. And then I'm going to sprinkle it with cinnamon. Now the recipe calls for a tablespoon and a teaspoon divided between the 2 loaves, but I've never measured it. I just give it a good sprinkling everywhere, making sure you get to the outer edges as well. And then we're going to put on our brown sugar. And I've got about 1/3 of a cup here. Again, usually I don't measure it, but that gives you a rough idea. And then we have those raisins that we boiled. Again, remember, it doesn't matter how much water was in your pan to boil them. Just bring the raisins and the water to a boil. Turn the heat off, put the lid on, let them just soak in that hot boiling water, which will, you know, obviously not stay boiling once you turn the heat off. Do all that while your bread dough is rising. That way your raisins are ready when your bread dough is ready. Drain them so that there's no liquid left on the raisins, and then you're going to put half of them on your dough here. And as I said, recipe called for 2/3 cup. I usually go a little higher than that. So that's a 1/3 cup, but I had a heaping one, so we need a heaping 1/3 cup on our bread as well. So there is our loaf of bread, and we're just gonna kind of roll this over in thirds. Then we have the seam side here, and I really kind of want to work that so that the seam side is my bottom side. I'm going to spray my pan. I might as well do both of them at the same time here. And then move this in. Oh, I've got some raisins pouring out the end, so I'm going to stuff them back inside my dough, lift it up, and stick it in. And you can see mine's actually maybe a little longer than the pan, but that's okay. Just kind of squeeze it back down in, and this is going to go sit in a warm spot again, and we're going to let it rise for, you know, roughly another hour, hour and a half, getting it to rise up, hopefully, above the top of the baking dish here. All right, next loaf of bread. Same thing, I'm just gonna get that flour kind of spread around here again a little bit. I think I have enough flour, but if you don't, you can add some more. And again, just kind of work it a little bit. And I'm going to then flatten it and stretch it to make a nice rectangle. You can flip it over, press it out with your fingers. This one's being a little more stubborn. It's all right, we'll get it there eventually. And then we'll be repeating the whole process with a little canola oil, a little cinnamon, brown sugar, raisins. Who can't enjoy that? There we go. A little bit more of a rectangular, really even a square is kind of what we're looking for here. Brush with my canola oil again. You don't need much of that. And 1/3 cup of brown sugar and the rest of the raisins. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like raisins, you know, recipes can just really be adjusted to fit your liking. So you could easily just make cinnamon whole wheat bread and skip the raisin part. But the raisins are my favorite part of it, along with that brown sugar. Again, I'm going to fold it in thirds. So I'm going to fold it over and fold it again. Let's get a closer look at that. All right, we're just going to fold over a third, fold over a third. We want to get that seam to the bottom, and then we're ready to set it into our baking dish that is already greased, and we're set to let this rise again. I'm back to my favorite bread rising place again. This time I'm going to go ahead and just cover the bread with a dish towel. All right, we'll have a look at that in an hour. Might take an hour and a half. Take a little peek. After 45 minutes, these are getting close to the top of the pan, and this one's really over the top in the center. So while this finishes rising, I am going to preheat my oven to 375 degrees. Well, here are my 2 beautiful loaves of bread. Just look how nicely that has risen. My oven's preheated to 375 degrees, so in go both loaves for 25 to 30 minutes. Now, as tempting as it can be, I don't suggest that you cut into this bread quite yet. It really should cool before you take a knife to it, or you're just going to kind of press it all together, and oh, we just have, especially this one has just risen beautifully. I think I had a little more dough in this one though than the other, so same dough, it should have risen pretty much the same, and the texture should be similar. Well, I'm just running a simple butter knife around the edges and putting my oven mitts back on. I'm going to put these on a cooling rack here to cool. Just setting them on their side, I usually do. And once these have sat for maybe like 30 minutes, a little longer would be better, but it's hard to wait any longer. Then these can be sliced with a serrated knife, and then lather them up with some butter. I can't wait to dig in and taste these, but with all parts of bread making, we have to be patient. Let's try the bread. It's cooled off pretty well here. I've got a nice serrated blade. One of them has kind of got the little roughly edge look to it. I'll just cut a couple slices here of this bread. I just love the smell of the fresh baked bread. I mean, you can smell it from the second you mixed it up while it was rising. Ooh, it's got this beautiful center where the brown sugar has all melted, and we got those raisins in there. I'm just gonna put a little butter on this and give it a taste. You know, I'm gonna have some of this for lunch today. Probably for an afternoon snack and another slice before I go to bed. You know, we have 2 loaves. We might as well enjoy all of this lovely, lightly, airy bread filled with cinnamon and raisins and brown sugar. It's perfect.